It is being recorded. So, you know, as always, the recording will be uploaded. I think I forgot to enable the recording, so I'm going to record it on Camtasia and we'll actually add it. It'll be on YouTube and then I'll just post the link. So the link will be available again, probably by announcement. So we couldn't expect it to go perfectly, right? All right, so I'll just make sure I have everybody. Rebecca joined us. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 3, 4, 5. Rebecca, Stone, and who else am I missing? I got Alexander. I got Olga. Oh, Osvaldo, you're here. All right, and so just so you know, if you are in here and I've written your name down, you know, you don't have to turn any summary in. You're here, okay? So we'll wait 1 more minute. And Chanel is here. Dana. All right, it's 12, so we'll go ahead and get started. So I hope everybody's enjoyed the last couple of weeks. I've really been enjoying our discussion groups. We've got some really, really great discussions going, I have to say. I have a couple reminders here for myself. Okay, so one thing on the discussions, and most of you are doing this, but there's a couple that are not, make sure that you're creating 2 separate posts and responding to 2 different prompts. It just makes it easier for my grading. So when I go back through and I look at the end and I can see post 1, post 2, I can see, okay, here you replied to somebody else and you put a question. And so I go through all of the discussions all the time and I read every single post and I try to respond and I try to get in there every single day. So I try to be very active in discussion so that you can feel like your questions get answered and I can see, you know, how we're reading the articles and that type of thing. So you can always post questions to me too. But when I'm grading, I just get a list of everything that you guys have done. And so any sort of markers that kind of indicate that this is a reply are just helpful for me when I grade. I sometimes I go back in the discussion and just to verify, but it helps me. So there is a rubric on there and you'll see you're graded on 3 different things. So there's 2 initial posts, so you get 4 points if those are on time and the required length. And then you get your replies, so you've answered to other people and you've left a question at the end, so there's 3 points for that. And then finally, for that final part, and you have all the way until Friday to complete that part, is to go in and answer anyone that posed a question to you or reply to anyone that replied to you. So make sure that you're doing that. And so if you do all 3 of those steps, you'll get 100% on each of those discussions, okay? And really, those discussions are so good for you for writing your short analysis. That's your time to kind of work it out, think about the article, talk to other people. Even if you don't respond to more than the 2 replies that you're required to do, I would definitely recommend going through and reading what other people wrote. I know some of you do that because I can see it in the posts that you do. But that will be really helpful for you in terms of analyzing it and seeing what those different points of view, and maybe somebody picked up on something else that you hadn't thought about before. So that can be really, really good. I've uploaded 2 new documents into Canvas in the course information. So as time goes on and I see that we need things or we start new units, I'll probably post things in course information. And so I posted a document talking about MLA format and formatting your analysis. So if you got docked down for that, make sure that you see that. I did a little video and went through and walked you step by step through creating your Word document. And so all the headings, name bars, inserting the page number, changing the font, removing the extra space between the paragraph. And then I even made it the works cited for like what would be the general form for the Atlantic articles, which is going to be a good percentage of the things that we quote, particularly in the first 6 or 7 weeks or so. So internet articles, right, from a source. So you can see that. So please go ahead and check those out and see what's in there. I posted another one on effective signal phrases, verbs, and so that you can look at that. Okay. All right, so today we're going to talk about Toulmin. I want to go over the three main vocabulary words that we are going to be using throughout analysis. Okay, and so for us, we're really looking at claim, support, and warrant. And so you've read chapter 2 this week. That's part of your homework. And I have the book with me right here. Here it is. Okay, and so I'm going to actually even look at the book a little bit as I talk to you guys because I really want you to use the book. It's supplemental to our class in terms of it's really kind of giving you that information that you're going to be applying to the articles. So really I'll tell you, okay, read chapter 2. We won't necessarily do the exercises and things out of that, but it will be really helpful for you, and I encourage you to go back to it a lot and use it as you're writing your analysis assignments, okay? So the Toulmin model consists of claim, support, and warrant, and that's a little bit of a simplified version of what that means. Okay, because realistically, the Toulmin model has qualifiers in it, it has backing for warrants, and there's a little bit more vocabulary involved, but we're really going to focus on these three terms, okay, and what they mean. So the first one is the claim, and in your short analysis this week, you're going to be analyzing Lovett's article, The Culture of Shut Up, and I'm going to ask you to identify his claim, and many of you have already done that in the discussion board, like you've already started that. And realistically, the claim is the statement that's being argued. In your past English classes, they probably called it the thesis statement, okay? And so essentially, we're using the term claim to refer to thesis. In the past, you may have learned that a claim is one of the major supports of an argument, and it is, but in Toulmin, it's essentially the thesis, okay? And there's three different kinds of claims that an argument can make, and so we will go over those. But this is where it gets a teeny bit confusing, okay? Because we've learned this other vocabulary, we're all going to switch to this Toulmin vocabulary, and claim becomes thesis. That doesn't mean that it's the only argument that's in an argument, right? There's a argument that the author is making, an overall argument, we'll call it, the claim, but there might be supporting arguments, okay? So if we look at Hamblin and why we can't talk about gun control, he really has multiple arguments going on. So his overall argument was that as a society, we're really incapable of engaging in real discussions about real issues. Gun control is simply the example, right? Why we can't talk about gun control. He's not arguing for or against gun control. He's really looking at why can we not talk about it, okay? And then he uses Metcalf, right, as a giant example, okay, as a supporting argument, right, that he has to prove Metcalf was really a credible spokesperson for gun control because, you know, he was a gun advocate himself. He wrote about guns. He had been trained in firearms. He was, you know, this award-winning shooter. All of these things gave Metcalf credibility, right? That's a supporting argument. The fact that Metcalf is a suitable example becomes a supporting argument to the idea that we can't talk about gun control, right? If Metcalf, who is this person who has all these credentials, can't talk about gun control, then the rest of us can't talk about gun control. Okay, so that's really going to be your challenge going forward as we analyze these arguments, determining what's the overall claim that the author is really trying to make. What's that big argument, okay? And then what are the supporting arguments? Okay, and that's really essentially what we're using Toulmin for, is to kind of determine how do we differentiate, what do we call these different parts, and that's analysis. Telling me what the argument is, that's summary, okay, right? Hamblin's argument was that we can't all that we can't engage in real discussions about real issues. Okay, that's a summary of his argument. Okay, to tell me how it was organized and the fact that that is the main claim, to identify it as his claim, that's analysis. Okay, so when we look at how, and we'll talk more about that. So going back to claims, there's 3 types of claims. Okay, the first is a claim of fact. And this really confuses students a lot of the times. Okay, and so this is where I strongly encourage you to go back to your book. And so I'm looking at the book right now, and claims is chapter 5. So we'll kind of do chapter 5 next week. But if you look at this, it really goes into what are all of the different types of claims of fact. So maybe we're arguing that there's a causal relationship between something. Maybe we're arguing that there's a correlative relationship. Maybe we're making a prediction for the future. But essentially, a claim of fact is not only an argument supported by facts. It does have facts in it, but every kind of argument should have facts in it, right? It should have things that are true as evidence. Okay, so we're going to make a difference between facts used as evidence and a claim of fact. A claim of fact really is arguing that a certain condition exists, okay, or it will exist, right? And that's based on factual evidence. So if I say global warming is occurring, that's a claim of fact, right? It's either occurring or it's not occurring, okay? I can prove that to be true with facts. Now, then why are claims of fact even arguments? That's the question. And there's so many things that are claims of fact that are not arguments, right? I'm a teacher. I mean, essentially, that's a claim of fact, but it's so widely accepted, it's not an argument, okay? So claims of facts become the kinds of arguments that we disagree about the facts. Some people say global warming doesn't exist, right? That these are natural changes in the environment. Some people are like, that's crazy. Of course there's global warming. We're doing this. And so all of those things, right? We differ on whether or not we accept the facts that are presented, and that's what makes it an argument. So that's a claim of fact, right? Existence. Does it exist? Does it not exist? Okay, the second type of claim is a claim of value. A claim of value is when we judge something. We decide if something is effective or ineffective based on a certain specific set of criteria. Okay, so if I say, a particular movie, I'm trying to think of a movie that's out right now. Maybe, Star Wars. Okay, if I say Star Wars is, one of the most effective, this new one, it's one of the most effective episodes in the whole series of episodes, right? That's a claim of value because I'm judging it. What am I judging it on? Well, I could be judging it on characters. I could be judging it on action. I could be judging it on special effects. Those are my criteria, okay? If I say Hamlin's argument is effective, I'm also judging it. Right? I'm saying, well, it's effective based on, it's logical, it has facts in it, his tone is very informative, right? That's my criteria. And so, again, I have to judge like things and I have to apply the same set of criteria to them. But essentially, that's a claim of value. So be careful. Sometimes people sort of mix that up and they definitely think it's, something more subjective. So anything that's subjective becomes a claim of value. And in a way, it's a little bit subjective because you are judging, but you're judging based on a specific set of criteria, okay? And so that's what makes it a claim. So just because something is emotionally based doesn't necessarily mean it's a claim of value. And then our third one, and I think probably the most easy, is our claim of policy, okay? So policy is that we say a specific course of action shall be implemented, but don't mistake action for always for change. Right? So if I tell you not to do anything, that's a course of action. If I tell you to think differently, that's a course of action, right? Even though physically something is not changing. So it's pretty easy for students when an author argues, we should change a law or we should all recycle, right? Then they can see tangibly what that action is. But remember, doing nothing is a course of action, not changing things. and thinking differently. So if an author tells, really wants you to think differently about an argument, we also consider that a change of policy, right? I want to change people's minds about this. That's a course of action. Change your mind, okay? So every argument that we read is going to fall into one of these three categories: fact, value, or policy. You can only have one. Authors can't have more than one main claim, okay? There is one main claim. They could have supporting arguments, but you can't say, well, this is a claim of fact and then this is a claim of value. If you're finding more than one in there, one is the supporting argument, and you have to determine which one that is, okay? So we will talk about this every single article we write, but what I need you to do is think about it in every single article that we write. That this is the analysis, to sit down and read that article and say, okay, what is the argument that this author is making? What is this main claim? And that's, read it through a couple of times, and that's essentially the first thing you want to decide. That's kind of the first step in the analysis. But at any time people have questions, go ahead, you can talk. I don't have anyone muted, or you can type them in. All right, so support is that second term in Toulmin. And so this week is going to be the overview, right? You're reading chapter 2. We're kind of looking at all of them. And then as we go through the next few weeks, we'll concentrate on each one specifically. So this is not going to be the only time, we talk about this or you hear about this. So in a few, 2 or 3 weeks, you'll do support. I think it's in 2. And so your analysis will be really focused on support. But support is part of those supporting arguments. It's also the idea of evidence. Okay, so we can use evidence and support kind of interchangeably, but remember, support also encompasses those supporting arguments that an author makes. Okay, so if we look at Levitt's Culture of Shut Up, the data is largely contextual rather than factual. So what does that mean? Contextual means context, situation. He gives us a bunch of examples, right? He talks about Alec Baldwin and the running back, I think, for the Seahawks, and who talks about winning. And he writes about, the cook lady, Paula Dean, okay? And so he talks about the media, and he writes about things that we know about. And so those are considered contextual evidence, right? Those examples that are relevant and known to the audience, okay? In Hamblin, why we can't talk about gun control, he's got a little bit of both, but he also has a lot of very specific kind of factual evidence, right? That data, how many people believe this, and what did people vote on, and if you said this, what did people say? And so that's a very different kind of evidence than we're used to seeing in Levitt's article. And a lot of you are, you notice that difference in tone when you read those articles, okay? So kind of think about, and it doesn't mean that one's evidence is better than the others. One could be more appealing to specific kinds of audiences. So it could give us an indication of who the audience is, right? The kind of evidence an author uses tells us who they're arguing to. I feel like Levitt, if you really look at those examples, they're examples that people who are on the internet a lot, right? Reading their email, Yahoo News, TMZ, those kinds of things that they're familiar with, and they're examples that are kind of from pop culture. Both, right? When internet, obviously that's where pop culture happens most of the time now. And so I would argue that he has a slightly younger audience in mind. If you noticed, if we talked about context, and this is something that would be included in an analysis, right? Contextual evidence, he was really looking at, he was giving a speech. Sorry, I'm writing Katie's name down. He was giving a speech. And so realistically, that speech who was he talking to? He was talking at a college. That's part of the context, okay? He was, directing his arguments to a very specific audience, a college audience in a particular town, right? And if you look at different colleges, you're going to have different ideological makeups. Some colleges are going to be more liberal. Some colleges are going to be more conservative. And so we would assume that a speaker is going to tailor his speech and the evidence he chooses, the support, to that particular audience. So one of your jobs as an analyzer is to say, okay, you don't have to agree or disagree with these articles. At this point, that doesn't really matter. We're not creating our own arguments. We're really looking at what is the argument that this person made and how did they make it? And one of those ways is to look at what evidence was used by the author and who does that evidence appeal to and how do I know that? Okay, what was the context that this argument took place in, right? Part of context is who the audience is, where it took place, the journal that it was published in, the fact that these are off of the Atlantic is part of context. All of those things are then part of that evidence and part of support, okay? So on pages 184 and 187 of your textbook, you'll notice that there are two giant charts in there, and there's questions that help you to evaluate the evidence. And so when we get to those chapters, I'm really going to ask you to look very specifically at those questions in pages 184 through 187 to say, is this evidence strong? Is this example resonate with the audience? Is, all of those things, okay? So we want to make sure that we are, understanding that. Okay. And then finally, we get to the warrant. So this is our third Toulmin term, okay? And then this is going to be probably the more difficult one. It's going to take us the most time to master. But the way Toulmin defines warrants, he says that these are like our underlying assumptions about things. So sometimes they can even be our worldviews. And so this is my favorite example of a warrant. Okay, is that, there was a court case in Britain, and this woman wrote a blog about a restaurant. She was like a restaurant critic on her blog. And so she wrote this review, and the restaurant owner, this was in France, I think, he sued her because her Google search results were too high. Okay, and so what that means is, when people searched for this restaurant owner's restaurant, instead of getting his restaurant, they got her search result. And the restaurant owner won. So even though this woman had no control over the Google search results, she still lost, okay, for like libel. It's basically her review hurt his restaurant. In the United States, that would never happen. So my question is, then what is the difference? Why could that happen in France, and in the US, somebody would probably be laughed out of court? Well, the difference is our warrants of free speech. In Europe, privacy is valued much, much more than freedom of press. So someone who operates a blog in Europe is not going to have those same kind of rights as like those journalistic freedom of speech rights that someone has in the United States. And that's a warrant, right? We have different beliefs, underlying assumptions about what people should get to say on the internet, in life, publish it in a newspaper, right? All of those things. And so that's a warrant, okay? So they're the ground upon which we stand, okay? So if you think about the culture of shut up, right? And what do we need to believe to buy Lovett's argument? Well, first we have to decide what Lovett's argument is, right? So essentially he's telling us we just can't, and a lot of you said this in your discussion board, so I'll kind of summarize them together. You can't just lump everybody together, right? You can't just say, I don't want to hear it. You have to embrace the noise of the argument, right? We need to do that, right? So if we want to do something, that's a course of action. So we'll say, here's a claim of policy, right? He wants us to believe differently. He wants us to act differently. He wants us to be more tolerant of other people's views, because of the First Amendment, and that's what we do in a democracy. Okay, so if we say that's his claim, what do we need to believe in order to believe that claim? In order to buy that claim, what are sort of the underlying assumptions that I have to have? Well, one of them would be he really thinks that by tolerating that speech, right, by tolerating the noise, we're going to generate more dialogue, and out of that dialogue will come a resolution. I mean, and he kind of has a point, because if we never engage, if we don't talk about anything, then we don't resolve anything, okay? I think we also have to believe that the speaker of the argument comes from a place of honesty, right? That they're motivated by a personal belief system, that I really believe, you know, Paula Deen is a bad person and that people shouldn't engage in hateful, racist speech, right? That when someone disparages Paula Deen on the internet for making racist comments, then I'm assuming that they're doing that because they don't believe, Can anybody not hear me? Okay. Olga, maybe you did. Rebecca still has me. Okay. Okay, perfect. So, yeah. So, I mean, I have to believe that person comes from a place of honesty to really think, okay, I need to listen to that person. But if I'm assuming that someone is doing this because they want publicity, or I'm assuming that they want to manipulate people into voting a particular way, or, if I believe there's some other subversive reason to the speech that's going on, then I'm less likely to buy Lovett's argument, right? Then I don't believe I should tolerate the noise because the noise is just trying to manipulate me. Okay, so we're really thinking about, when we think about those warrants, we're thinking about, okay, and they could be stated or unstated. It doesn't matter. Sometimes the warrants are stated. A lot of times they are. In most of our food articles coming up, they are. Okay, but if you think about Lovett, I don't think he really states his warrants. He makes his claim and he gives a lot of those like pop cultural kind of examples, but he doesn't really, engage in sort of the underlying warrants. I do think the First Amendment is also one of his underlying warrants, and he does support that one, and that is stated. So, I mean, we have to believe that there is freedom of speech in order to buy Lovett's argument in the first place. That would be another warrant, okay? So, sometimes those warrants are supported, sometimes they're not, and we will work on warrants with every single article. Thank you, Lance. But that is something that we're going to continue to work on as we go, okay? All right, so one of the things that you can think about, particularly as you're kind of thinking about warrants and what they are, is think about your own field. So are you in nursing? Are you in engineering? Are you in, we had a lot of scientists out there. We had some teachers, okay? What are the controversial issues? So maybe for teachers, Common Core, right? That's a new controversial issue coming up. If we think about what are the assumptions underneath our beliefs about teaching, that those would be our warrants, okay? So let's take Common Core, right? Because we're all maybe like slightly familiar with that. So Common Core, generally people are arguing we should keep it, we shouldn't keep it, right? It's a good thing. It develops critical thinking, that type of thing, okay? And so underlying warrants, we have to decide, okay? What is it that I believe about education that would then make me say yes to Common Core or say no to Common Core? Well, for me particularly as an educator, I believe that one of the things we're trying to do is create critical thinkers, right? Which is an aim of Common Core. So then maybe I would lean more towards Common Core, okay? Particularly in the sciences, some instructors, particularly like if they're teaching at the beginning level of those, they really focus on content teaching, Okay, they're saying, no, you need to know this concept, you need to know this definition, you need to know how to do these math problems. So it's a much more different kind of way to look at education than maybe somebody in the humanities does. Okay, and not all science teachers and math teachers, but I mean, a large majority of them really focus on content instruction. And it makes sense. If you don't know the definitions and you don't know how to do things in science, you're not going to know how to do the higher level stuff. So, you know, but they may not like some of the Common Core because of that reason. Okay, because they're like, no, I need to do more content instruction to get people to the point that they can think critically. You're putting the cart before the horse. Okay, so depending on how I look at education, right, the way I support that argument is going to change. Okay. All right, so that was our overview of Toulmin. Okay, so if you feel a little bit overwhelmed, don't worry. Like I said, we're going to be doing it for several weeks, but at the same time, on your part, you need to really consciously be thinking about these things, reading the chapters, looking at examples, asking questions in discussion board, and 100% applying those ideas into your discussion board posts. So that's your time to practice. Okay, so you need to get used to using that vocabulary because it takes a while to get the hang of it. It's a new vocabulary, and so, you know, make sure that you're reading my comments back. One of the things I'm noticing about Canvas, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there's a lot of comments in different places, which is good. So if you ever ask me a question and I don't answer something or there's something there, because I feel like I get comments from a lot of different places. And so sometimes it's in grading and sometimes, you know, it's other places. So if you feel a little bit overwhelmed about that or you feel like you're missing things, let me know. And, you know, maybe that, I don't know, needs to be a way we set that up so we're all looking in the same place. Okay, but I do put comments. So every time I grade, you'll get comments in multiple places. So you will get them on the document itself. So I literally go up, there's a little comment button, and there should be little bubbles kind of attached, you know, to those specific sentences. And then I usually put a submission comment on the right-hand side, depending on what I'm grading. But short analysis, usually then there's some sort of comment over there. But then I'll also put comments on the paper itself. So if you have questions about that, but make sure you're checking for both of those. A couple of people, I might have had to put it in turnitin.com. I had a couple issues with certain kinds of files that were uploaded. They wouldn't go to turnitin.com. So I tried to limit the files this time. So hopefully that works better. And turnitin.com will process it. It also wouldn't let me comment on the paper for those files either for some reason. I don't know. We'll figure that part out. So if you're not getting comments on the paper, that might also be a reason. So I know if you're submitting a Word document, it should work. Okay. But just to remind everybody, the analysis guidelines. So I do want MLA format. So by MLA format, I do mean, you know, Times New Roman, font size 12, no extra spacing between paragraphs, inserted page number and last name in the right hand corner. So I'm getting a variety of different fonts. So I do want it to be an MLA format, and it should be Times New Roman. If you're typing it in Pages, I don't think they have Times New Roman. Microsoft Word is available through Office 365 free to students. So everybody should have access to Microsoft Word, and I would suggest typing it in there. Okay. So you should have a citation of the source. So if you didn't have a citation this week, you did get a 0, and I'm sorry. Okay, but I want you to do that now and not on a bigger assignment. Okay, so everything we write, anytime you use an outside source, that source should be cited, and the citation for this week should have been Jones, or for last week. For this week, it will be Lovett. Okay. And if you have any questions about that, watch the video that I uploaded into course information on the modules page, and that should help you out. Okay, so that first paragraph, I want the first sentence to have a signal phrase, and we'll talk about signal phrases. And for some of you, I also uploaded a document on active verbs for signal phrases, and I also put that in course information, so you can check that out too. But that very first sentence should have a signal phrase, which should have the title and the author in it, and then it should have a indication of the type of claim that the author used. So it was a claim of fact, policy, or value. You got to choose one and explain what that claim was. So that should be the first sentence. Okay, the next 4 to 5 sentences after that, or 4 to 7, but not to exceed over 25% of the document, should be a summary. Okay, so that's the first paragraph. Okay, so I do want a clear, organized summary. This is what the article was about. Okay, you should have at least 3 paragraphs. So the second and third paragraph should be your analysis paragraphs. And so realistically, at that point, that first sentence, that topic sentence of paragraph 2 and the topic sentence of paragraph 3 should really indicate what analysis is going to take place. So for a lot of you, my comments on that particular sentence were, something like, make a really strong topic sentence here that indicates, what you're analyzing. So a lot of what I got was Jones also wrote, or something like that. And that's a signal phrase that indicates summary, because you're just telling me what she said. You're not telling me why she said it or how she said it, right? Which is our analysis. So an analysis looks, okay, so this is over on this left-hand side of the slide. Analysis is really looking at audience. It's looking at purpose, evidence, bias, tone. Implications are the conclusions we draw from the evidence given. So for example, you could say something like, well, if Jones says that the argument is war, metaphor is dangerous in shaping our minds or shaping the way we think about argument, then what? What does that mean, right? That's analysis. So that's an interpretation of what's going forward. Okay, so again, we want that topic sentence to include that. I don't think I got any personal examples or I statements, so that's really, really good. So kind of refrain from those, but I don't think I got any, but I will look to those in the future. So make sure I don't forget anything on this one. Okay, so here are some questions if you're kind of struggling with the analysis part or the writing of that topic sentence, okay? So who is the argument directed at? Okay, so maybe you have a paragraph that analyzes the audience. Okay, so Jones' argument is really directed at the American public. All right, that could be a strong topic sentence. What that means is the rest of that paragraph then is going to tell me how you know that her audience is directed at the American public, right? What evidence does she provide? What are the conclusions that you draw from that? What do we assume that she knows about the audience based on the argument that she gives? How does she think the audience already believes? So you could say something like, Jones thinks that her audience doesn't realize the dangers of the kinds of arguments that they are subjected to. And then you would give me evidence to show how they don't realize that. Okay, maybe you're looking at bias. Okay, and I've had in the past a lot of people, and I'd actually kind of disagree, tell me that Lovett is very biased, that he's very liberal. I would agree that he is probably liberal, but their evidence for that is that he used to work for Hillary Clinton. And I actually feel like that makes him less biased because he's telling you. And so bias is really when someone clearly favors another side or is clearly ignoring some sort of counter evidence. Okay, so if you really want to convince me of bias, you're going to have to show me what is being omitted that should be there. What is that indication of bias? We could say that tone does indicate some bias, and I think that's, he does have a very satirical, kind of funny tone, right? But I think he is trying to be less biased by sort of, making them green people and purple people, right? He's trying to avoid sort of, those traditional kinds of labels that we give people for liberal and conservative, and by giving it purple, right, which has no connotation. Okay. Why has the author chosen to structure the argument in a particular way? And this was sort of an example that you had this week with Hamblin. Why does he choose to make his argument, not have the claim until the very end? And we'll read another article by Hamblin and he does it again. And so it's sort of the way he does it. Why does he do that? Is it an indication that his audience doesn't agree with him, right? So that he's giving more evidence up front. And you'll find that the authors who think that their audience is more likely to be kind of hostile to their opinion will put their claims further at the end. They'll present more evidence at the beginning, okay? So tone is also a particular, way that you could analyze. And so you might group these things together because maybe the tone indicates audience. So really, realistically, while you're saying who the audience is, you're citing tone as evidence to say who that audience is. You're citing the structure of the argument. So then all those things would go together in the same paragraph because they all indicate audience. Okay. So if you have any questions about that or want help with your analysis, I actually really, really want to try out the screen sharing software in this conference stuff. So if you would like to work one-on-one with a paper or an analysis assignment, I would be more than happy to. We could do it at night or we could do it on the weekend. And because like I said, I really want to actually try out how to do the screen sharing. So I'd be very happy to work with someone who would want to do that. And I see a note from Chanel, sorry. And it said, are we statements acceptable? So going back to right here, my problem with we statements is that it has to be very clear who you're talking about. So if you've already named the audience and then you want to say like the audience was the American public, you could say we because you're a part of the American public. But you can't say we from the beginning. Okay, so this is the thing with pronouns, right? Pronouns stand in for nouns, but we use we before we actually use the noun itself. So it's actually, you can't use a pronoun that way. You have to say the American public, and then you can say we, right? Or they. If you use they first, then it doesn't quite work because you haven't indicated who they are or who we are, that type of thing. So definitely in person wise, okay, first person, second person, third person, indicate who it is before you ever use a pronoun. That would just be the general rule for that. But yeah, we is acceptable for academic writing, but know that then you are putting yourself in that category also, right? Okay. So we will skip that one. All right, so one thing I want to look at is these verbs used in signal phrases. So here's the signal phrase outline, and this is page 2. So we'll look at page 1 for MLA. It's 2 pages, so MLA and APA. And you can see MLA style phrases consist of the name and qualifications of your source, followed by a verb. So you can put the qualifications. You can also, I would say, put the title. If you're talking about Hamblin, we all know, or love it. We know that he is the particular author of, this particular article, right? But when you're using, like at the end of the semester, when you're writing your research paper or your argument essay, and you want to make sure that your audience knows who you're talking about. So here they have Sean Bascombe, International Student Coordinator, claims that. Okay, that would be a signal phrase. Or Dr. Halzenberg, history professor at ISU, okay, or Governor Schwarzenegger fears that, okay. So you can see in these places they're using these people as a type of evidence, generally expert testimony, and that's what the signal phrase does. For us, because we're using the signal phrase as an indication of who wrote something, you would want to include the title too. But you can see underneath that you have all these verbs: acknowledges, adds, admit, affirms, answers, denies, predicts, thinks, okay, warns. So really choose a verb. Like when you're describing that main claim, is the author asserting? Are they speculating? Are they illustrating? Are they denying something? So pick a verb that very specifically explains what the author is doing. A lot of times what people do is they choose mentions. And mentions kind of drives me crazy because it sounds like, oh, they said it in passing, right? I mentioned that to you yesterday. Okay, so mentioned is a really, really weak verb in that sense, and it shouldn't be the verb of that main claim, right? Because the main claim, they're at least arguing, right? They might be echoing, maybe somebody else said it first, but mentions, again, it just makes it sound like it's just very much in passing and it's not really that important, okay? So we want to make sure that the main verb really exemplifies, that it specifically points out the tone that we want to give for this particular claim. Okay, so I know this was a lot of information, okay, and so at least it is recorded, so if you want to go back and look at it, you can. But any questions about this week, about information, about Toulmin, the book? The doc that I just put up is in, yes, this is in the modules and course information. I've already posted it. So it's up there. You are welcome. All right, you guys. So we'll hope that recorded on Camtasia. I'm hoping. And if not, I will be making another video. But you guys have a good week. I'm going to finish up reading discussions and commenting this afternoon, hopefully. So I'll be talking to you guys online. And like I said, if anybody's interested in doing like a little, workshop on their short analysis, I would love to. I really want to try that software out. So let me know if you're interested in doing that. Okay, and I have Alexander, Chanel, Katie, Olga, Osvaldo, Patricia, Raymond, Rebecca, and Rubit. I think I have all of you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I do. All right. So if there's no questions, I'll see you guys all later. You too. Have a great day.